Good morning.
All right. Thank you so much, Toby, for that lovely introduction. My name's Emily Wilkins. I am a congressional reporter with Bloomberg Government. I focus mostly on the House. And of the 435 members in the House, I think Congresswoman Bice is really one of the most interesting ones to be watching right now, not only for all the reasons that were just listed, but you are also a member of leadership. You are the vice chair of the recently revitalized Main Street Caucus. You are the subcommittee chair for the Modernization Caucus, which is all very fantastic. But the thing, of course, we want to ask you about today is really to hone in on the bipartisan working group that you have on paid family leave. And I just wanted to start by taking the 30,000-foot view here because you are a working mom. You work with working moms, you represent working moms, and just trying to get your sense of what the biggest challenges are right now that working women face.
Well, I think one of these is not working. How's that? All right, good morning. First, I want to say thank you to Toby and to Engage for having me here with you all today. It's an honor and privilege to be here. You know, I think from a 30,000-foot overview, I have been in those shoes. Now, let me preface saying that my girls are older now. I have two daughters that are in college. I have a senior and a freshman. And so I've spent their younger years navigating the waters that many women are trying to wade through today, and that is trying to figure out, how do you have that work-life balance? How do you make all of these things tick in a way that you feel like you are engaged in providing for your children, but also be able to have a satisfying and successful personal or professional career? And it's tough. There are sacrifices, but I think for me personally, having an incredible spouse has been amazing. He is willing to do the dishes. He is willing to do carpool. And I think that having that partner to be able to co-parent is just absolutely vital. And for me, that's what really, I think, makes everything work. It also takes a village. I have a group of amazing friends back home that we have been through some stuff. We have been through cancer diagnosis, the loss of a spouse at 37, divorce, you name it. And that village, those are the women that you call upon and say, I need you. And they show up with no makeup on and in sweats and say, I'm here to help. And so finding your people, I think, allows you that ability to be able to do all the things that we all want to do in our professional careers.
And so can you talk a little bit, too, about that community then in Congress and what that looks like? Because you mentioned that you have a good support group back home, but obviously you're spending a lot of your time in D.C. these days.
Yeah. You know, it was hard. A little background about me. I was elected in 2020, and so it was during still the height of COVID. And when I came to Washington, D.C., we were still under COVID protocol. And as many of you know, part of being a legislator is developing relationships and, you know, fostering those relationships. And when you can't grab a cup of coffee or go have a glass of wine or dinner together, that makes it pretty difficult. So the first year of my congressional career was a little lonely, quite frankly, and difficult to build those relationships. But as we progressed through COVID, you know, vaccines were rolled out, things became easier. And one of the maybe great honors that I have is being part of a freshman class that actually, on the Republican side, elected the largest number of women in history. There were 20 women in the freshman class of the 117th Congress. And many of us have children of varying ages. And so we were able to really bond over that, to bounce ideas off of each other, to figure out, how do we make this work? And that's been really, really incredible.
I want to get into talking a little bit about and I want to make sure I get the name right, the Bipartisan Leave Family Working Group that you have.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
With Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan. Obviously, that is a bipartisan thing that you're both looking at. You have said in the past that the group is starting with a blank slate, that nothing is off the table, and you're going to be really methodical and thoughtful about this. Of course, we did have a paid leave push last year with President Biden's proposed Build Back Better plan. It didn't happen. What are the challenges of getting paid family leave through Congress at this point?
Well, first let me say that I'm incredibly excited for the opportunity for Chrissy and I to work together. We actually had offices across the hall. We are on opposite sides of the political spectrum in many ways, but we also have a lot of commonalities. We both have 2 daughters about the same ages apart. Hers are a little older. And we both had experiences with paid family leave. I was in a role 22 years ago that the company I worked for offered a short-term disability benefit, which allowed me to receive a paycheck for 8 weeks while after the birth of my daughter, which 22 years ago was almost unheard of. She was military and almost separated from the military because there was no family leave benefit at the time. So we were both on armed services last year. We partnered together to look at providing paid family leave for our military families. We're able to get that across the finish line. And that's when we were approached to look at doing this on the federal level. Certainly there are challenges, but our perspective is we want to look at this from a clean slate, and that means for the most part putting aside what's been discussed or done in the past, and there are a lot of proposals, and looking at them with a fresh set of eyes. There have been senators and previous House members that have put together proposals that really haven't gotten very far. We also have a lot of engagement with outside groups, but something feels different now. You had a lot of discussion with the Trump administration and Ivanka Trump looking at paid family leave and trying to figure out how can we move forward. And I think that enthusiasm and that focus has continued. And now's the time. Is it going to be easy? No, it's not. But we, Chrissy and I, both recognize that this is something that if you were to poll, maybe not this room, this is a little bit of a unique set of women, but if you polled the average majority of our constituency, they would say that it's time for this to happen. Family Medical Leave Act, which was passed 30 years ago last month, was really the first step in finding a paid family leave solution. And we haven't really done anything since. And so we feel very confident that we'll spend these next months or year investigating, researching, asking all the questions, and then trying to find a way to move forward.
Have you had some discussions at this point with Speaker Kevin McCarthy, with some of the committee chairs that might be handling this? What is your sense as far as their interest in doing something like this?
There is an interest. Chairwoman Elise Stefanik actually had legislation that she had drafted with the Senate side looking at this issue. So there is an interest with leadership. We haven't approached leadership or the committees with this information or this sort of idea yet because we don't have an answer right now. We are in the fact-finding phase. So once we start gathering the pieces, once we start really formulating an idea and plans, then we'll start going to the members as well as committee and leadership to try to move forward.
And I know that you, of course, mentioned your victory last year in getting paid family leave tied in with defense and military families. Can you talk a bit about some of the other victories you're seeing at this point when it comes to paid family leave? Because I know, obviously, a lot of states are looking at this, private companies are looking at this. What does the landscape really look like right now?
You have about a dozen states that have put forward some sort of paid family leave initiative. Some have been through sort of a social insurance type plan. Some have been funded through employer-employee payroll taxes. But I think it's a highlight that we're beginning to see this across the nation. In red states, in blue states, this is something that's being talked about. And that's why I feel like now is the time for us to really come together and find a baseline that we can push forward, and I feel good about it.
And for some of the research that you're doing, the investigation, can you talk a little bit more about that? What at this point are you looking for? What are some of the gaps that remain in terms of paid family leave and how it could work at the federal level?
Well, we just launched this in January, so it's still fairly new, and there are a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. We had an initial meeting with Senator Dodd, who was one of the original authors of Family Medical Leave Act. He actually came to a roundtable with Chrissy and I and our staff to walk through the challenges. We also had a Republican staffer who was part of that initiative as well. And really, he and Stephanie talked about what the uphill battle was. It took them 7 years to get FMLA across the finish line. So we're looking at how can we learn from the past? What are the pitfalls that they experienced? We've had a couple of actually roundtables this week. As a matter of fact, one yesterday, where we brought in executives or government officials from the states that have either just launched paid family leave or have had it in place for a while, states like Washington State, to ask them, how did you do this? What was the biggest obstacle for you to overcome? Really learning, and that's what our goal is right now, is to ask the questions and to learn. I don't want to formulate any ideas without having a really deep understanding of where we're going. And I'll sort of share, this is how I operate and have for quite some time. I'll give you a little personal story. I was in the state legislature in Oklahoma in the state Senate. And my claim to fame back home, strangely enough, is alcohol modernization. Oklahoma had really antiquated alcohol laws, and you couldn't buy wine in a grocery store. And for a mom, that's kind of a problem. And so I took on this unbelievable challenge of completely rewriting an entire title of law and putting forward a state question. But I spent a year and a half doing it. I don't like to make decisions without having all the facts. And so for me, this fact-finding mission, whether it is speaking to state legislators, speaking to states that have done this, we'll have a hearing in a week or so with insurance companies that are providing paid family leave benefits to employers and employees. This is really the baseline for how we try to formulate whatever the plan may be moving forward.
I think that's also, as many of us in this room know, very realistic to the timeline with which Washington tends to operate.
Yeah, there seems to be this understanding that we can sort of put something out there today and it'll get passed. And I have to remind people that the process is slow for a reason. You don't want to make hasty decisions because you oftentimes will be left with poor outcomes. And so for me, it's important that we do this right. We have to make potential tweaks down the road, yes. But spending the time now to really deep dive and research all of the challenges will actually help us produce a better outcome long term.
I know we have a couple of really great panels that are coming up today, and the next one is making sure that we are raising resilient, mentally strong, and competent girls. And I just wanted to see, your daughters are now in college. How have you thought about raising your girls? And from the congressional perspective, I know there's been a lot of conversation recently about education. Do you have a sense that this might be something that, from a federal perspective, there's also something that needs to be done in terms of ensuring that girls are empowered?
Well, I would say, for me, being that positive role model, I was approached about running for the state legislature in Oklahoma. It was never on my radar. I was actually, I had my own small business. I had worked for the family business. Politics was not something that was in the cards for me, or so I thought. And I remember when I was asked to consider running, one of the things I thought about was that there were not enough women serving in the Oklahoma State Legislature at the time. There were 6 out of 48. And I thought to myself, this is an incredible opportunity for me to do something big and bold and outside the box, and to show my daughters, don't be afraid to do the same. And my daughters have. They have done some really, incredible things themselves at this very young age. And putting themselves out there. And I think we as women often have to be sort of coached, encouraged to do things. We don't always say, by gosh, I'm going to do this. So raising them with that mindset of, you can do anything you want. You can make this happen. You just have to put one foot forward and start going. You brought up the mental health aspect, and I think it's really important. There's a lot of conversations right now in DC around social media. I do think it's detrimental to our kids. I do try to limit their exposure, at least when they were younger. Now they're in college, and this whole TikTok thing has created quite the dinner conversation at the Bice house. But I will say that, there are some concerns I have for especially girls engaging in social media online, because there's this idea that it's sort of this idealistic world, and that's not the reality. And even now, my youngest daughter being a freshman in college, that fear of missing out sort of narrative creeps in, and I have to remind her, you don't need to be at everything. You don't need to go to everything. It's okay to be at home every once in a while and kind of chill and, recenter yourself. Those conversations are really important, and I don't know that we have them enough. We don't remind our children, men or, girls or boys, you're enough. You're doing the best you can. You have, find those great sets of friends to lift you up. I think we forget that those are really important. And so encouraging as parents, those young people to find themselves but also support them is incredibly valuable.
And I just wanted to go back to one interesting point that you touched on, is the fact that a lot of your freshman class was women. And I think in 2018, we saw a lot of Democratic women wind up winning their elections and helping Democrats have the House. And then, of course, in 2020, and then again in 2022, we saw Republican women step up and do something similar. So it's been very interesting to kind of watch that shift happen with more and more women coming into the House.
And I think for Republican women in particular, I think we saw the 2018 election cycle and said, wait a minute, why are we not doing this too? You had the blue wave of, I think there were 80 Democrat women that were elected that cycle roughly. And I think we all thought, well, if they're doing it, so can we. And that's why you've seen so many women file for candidacies across the country, and now the largest number of women elected in one election cycle on the Republican side in 2020.
We also have a panel coming up today on recruiting and promoting women. And obviously, as a member of Congress, you are a boss, you have a staff. And I just wanted to see sort of what some of your internal practices, also as a former small business owner, how you've thought about your ability to promote women within the workplace and just make sure that they are getting the things that they really need to thrive.
That's a great question. And I have about a 50-50 staff. And a couple of my staffers do have children. It's a young staff, but being a parent myself and having the opportunity to have flexibility in the workplace, I think is important. One of the great things about COVID that we learned is that we don't have to be in the office every day to actually get our work done. So providing some flexibility for families in particular, but all of our employees to be able to navigate that work-life balance is important. When you have children, it's even more of a, I think, focus, because you want to be at certain things. You want to sort of attend a afternoon event or take him on a field trip, and so that flexibility is key. I would also say, though, that it's not just for women. My office, when I was elected, made a conscious effort to put a, funny enough, paid family leave policy in place. And the only individual that's actually taken paid family leave that has had children in my office is my deputy chief of staff, who is a male. And it was incredible. He was so thankful that he had the opportunity to support his wife, but also be at home with his newborn. And now he has 2 beautiful children, and he's had them while he's been in my office. And so I sort of am in the example with my peers that this is how it's done. This is easy to do. We just have to make the effort to make sure that we're supporting our working families, because if we have our working families participating, it's better for everyone. And this is a way we can show support.
Well, I think that is a perfect note to leave it on. Congresswoman Bice, thank you so much for taking the time today. This is really informative. And of course, we're all going to be anxiously watching over the next couple of years for what happens with paid family leave. Thank you again.
Thank you, Emily.